The old man collapsed on the cold marble steps of the county courthouse just as the morning sun crept over the rooftops, and not a single person stopped to help him. Shoes passed by his trembling hands, briefcases brushed his bent shoulders, and the sound of hurried lives swallowed the faint rhythm of his breathing. He had spent decades becoming invisible, and now, as his body failed him in the heart of downtown Columbus, Ohio, the world proved just how thoroughly it had learned to look through him. No one knew his name mattered. No one knew his silence carried a lifetime of sacrifices, and no one imagined that within weeks, the same people who ignored him would sit stunned as his will was read aloud, forcing them to confront the cost of their indifference. Before we continue, if you believe kindness still matters, if you believe people deserve second chances no matter how forgotten they seem, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps stories like this alive. His name was Harold Whitman, though almost no one used it anymore. To the residents of his neighborhood, he was just the old man on Grant Street, the one who walked slowly with a worn coat even in spring, the one who fed pigeons with trembling fingers, the one who never complained even when teenagers laughed at his shoes held together with tape. Harold had once been strong, once been admired, once been needed. In his younger years, he worked at a steel fabrication plant on the outskirts of the city, clocking in before dawn and returning home long after sunset. He married a gentle woman named Margaret, raised 2 children named Thomas and Rebecca, and believed that if he worked hard enough, life would reward him with security and respect. But life, as it often does, changed its mind. The factory shut down when Harold was in his early 50s. His savings dwindled as he searched for work that never came. Margaret's health failed shortly after, and the hospital bills arrived faster than hope. When she passed away, the house felt too quiet and far too empty. His children, burdened by their own struggles and resentful of a father who could no longer help them financially, drifted away. Phone calls became rare, then non-existent. Eventually, letters came back unopened. Harold sold the house to pay debts, moved into a small rented room, and learned how quickly a man could disappear without actually dying. Years passed and Harold adapted to being ignored. He volunteered at the local church when his joints allowed it, cleaned floors in exchange for meals, and spent his afternoons at the public library where warmth and silence were free. People saw him daily and never truly saw him at all. They did not know he once carried his daughter on his shoulders during 4th of July parades, or that he taught his son how to ride a bike in the same parking lot now filled with luxury cars. They did not know he donated small amounts to charities, even when he barely had enough for himself. They did not know he kept a small notebook where he wrote prayers for strangers whose faces he would never forget. The day Harold collapsed, it was not cruelty that made people pass by, but indifference born from routine. A young lawyer named Andrew Keller noticed him briefly but assumed someone else would help. A real estate agent named Melissa Grant stepped around him, irritated that he blocked her path. A city clerk named Jonathan Moore glanced down, hesitated, then kept walking, convincing himself he was already late. Eventually, a janitor named Samuel Brooks called for help, and Harold was taken to the hospital where doctors discovered his heart was failing quietly, just as his life had. Harold spent his final days in a shared hospital room, watching sunlight trace patterns on the wall. No family came. No friends sat by his bed. Nurses did what they could, but their shifts ended, and the room always returned to silence. What no one knew was that Harold had already made peace with his loneliness. In a small envelope kept in his coat pocket, he carried a will written with careful handwriting and signed months earlier. He had very little in terms of material wealth, but what he did have, he intended to use to teach a final lesson. When Harold passed away, the hospital social workers struggled to locate next of kin. Eventually, Thomas and Rebecca were found and notified. They arrived separately, their expressions guarded, their grief complicated by years of distance. They arranged a modest service more out of obligation than love. Only a handful of people attended, including the janitor Samuel, who felt a strange guilt he could not explain. The service ended quietly, and most assumed Harold's story had ended with him. But the reading of the will changed everything. The probate hearing took place in a small courtroom filled with people who had once ignored Harold without a second thought. Thomas and Rebecca sat stiffly, expecting little. The lawyer cleared his throat and began. Harold had saved more than anyone imagined. Decades of frugal living, careful investments, and a small inheritance from a distant cousin had accumulated into a surprising sum. But it was not the amount that caused the room to grow silent. It was how Harold chose to distribute it. Harold left modest amounts to his children, not out of bitterness, but honesty, acknowledging the distance between them and expressing hope they would find peace. The rest of his estate was divided among people whose names startled the room. The janitor Samuel Brooks received funds to send his daughter to college. The nurse who sat with Harold during night shifts received money to pay off her student loans. The public library received a donation large enough to expand its senior programs. The church received funds to open a community kitchen. Even Andrew Keller, Melissa Grant, and Jonathan Moore were mentioned, each receiving a small sum accompanied by a written note describing the day Harold collapsed and how their choice to walk away reminded him of how easily people forget one another. As the lawyer read those words, faces drained of color, the room filled with an unbearable weight of shame. Harold had seen them. Even in his weakest moment, he had noticed their faces, their hesitation, their turning away, and instead of anger, he responded with a lesson they would carry forever. Just before we continue, pause for a moment and comment below. Write the word kindness if you believe small actions can change a life. Your comment helps this story reach others who need it. News of the will spread quickly through Columbus. Local papers ran headlines about the invisible man who left a visible impact. People who once passed Harold daily began questioning their own habits. The city council discussed new outreach programs, the library filled with seniors who felt welcomed for the first time. Samuel Brooks cried openly when he realized his daughter's future had been altered by a man he barely knew but would never forget. Thomas and Rebecca, shaken by the will, began to confront their own regrets. They visited the places Harold once spent his days, reading his donated notebook of prayers preserved at the church. They learned who their father had become when they were not looking. Slowly, painfully, they understood that love does not disappear just because it is ignored. They began volunteering at the kitchen, funded by his estate, finding healing not in inheritance, but in service. The people named in the will were changed in quieter ways. Andrew Keller began carrying spare time in his schedule, stopping when someone needed help. Melissa Grant started greeting the homeless by name, donating coats each winter. Jonathan Moore volunteered with emergency response teams, unable to forget how close he came to being the man who did nothing. Harold's final act reached farther than money ever. Near the end of this story, if it has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like the video, share it, and subscribe. These stories only matter if they are felt, and your engagement helps spread compassion. Harold Whitman was ignored in life, but in death, he became impossible to forget. His will was not just a document, it was a mirror held up to a city, forcing it to see the value of those it walks past every day. He proved that dignity does not require recognition, that kindness can exist without applause, and that even the quietest lives can leave echoes that reshape the world. As the courthouse steps grew busy again, people walked differently. Some slowed down, some looked twice, some stopped, and somewhere beyond the noise, the memory of an old man who fed pigeons and prayed for strangers lingered, reminding everyone that the true measure of a life is not how loudly it is lived, but how deeply it is felt.